So this video is a little different than our last few videos just because it's more of an update. We've been in Florida 3 weeks now and the last week has been completely insane and crazy. We're still kind of recovering from it, so I thought I would just give you the rundown about what's been going on. The first 2 weeks we were in Florida, we stayed at the Fechtel Tract, which is this campground kind of way out in the middle of nowhere on the east side of Orlando, and the closest town is 30 miles away. And there wasn't a whole lot of people ever at this campground either. There were the camp host, Debbie and Russ, who they weren't horse people, but they kind of just managed and oversaw the campground, made sure it was taken care of and kept up and things like that. So shout out to them because they're going to be a big part of the story. So Debbie and Russ, if you're watching, we love you all. About a week ago, I went out to feed the horses their evening meal, and I usually feed around 7 p.m. And right off the bat, something wasn't right. Tucker knows when it's time to feed, and he will whinny and call for his food. He didn't do that. So then when I got up to their pens, I noticed he was laying down, and he was sitting upright and looking at me, but he just wasn't getting up to come eat. So that to me was strange. Like, not so much that he was laying down, because maybe he laid down to take a nap, but more so that he wasn't getting up. Because, you know, horses love food, so you'd think they would be all gung-ho to come eat. So I went in there, I really had to coax him and even kind of push him to get him up on his feet. And then I took him over to his feed bucket, and he looked at his food, but he was not interested. He just walked away, and he went and laid back down. And when he laid down, he stretched out his legs like this, like really stiff, and his eyes kind of like glazed over for a second. And I was immediately freaking out. And I was like, okay, he is definitely colicking. So Colin had come out with me, and I immediately tell Colin, like, start trying to find a vet, because we're out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know any vets. I don't know any horse people in the area. And so we're freaking out. It's 7 p.m., so it's already late. It's already past business hours. And initially, we had a very hard time getting a hold of a vet. He's walking Tucker in a circle, trying to keep him from laying down. I'm calling every single person I can find on Google and online. No one's answering. And the people who answered, they're not taking new clients. And it was very overwhelming because I just felt like I'm in an emergency. I don't know this area. You know, we've only been here a week or so. Like, I don't know what to do. And it was a very stressful and overwhelming experience. So finally, we got a hold of one of the vets who recommended a horse hospital up in Ocala. Ocala was like an hour and a half away. I call the horse hospital. They say, bring him in. There's actually a bunch of colic cases happening right now. So they have more people coming in too. By this point, it's 8 p.m. And, you know, going anywhere with horses takes longer than it would just in a normal car. And so getting to Ocala will probably take about 2 hours. Colin goes and he knocks on the camp host's door, and they jump into action to help us. They help Colin hook up the trailer, to get stuff out of the trailer. There are shining lights for me so I can walk Tucker and be on the phone. It was very chaotic, and Colin basically just threw everything out of the trailer, like all of our feed, all of our tack, everything that goes in the back when the horses aren't in there. And he just threw it on the ground, and he was like, well, this will be okay for the night, and we'll come back and get it. I have to figure out what to do with Ruach, because we're 2 hours to an hour and a half away if we take Tucker. We can't take Ruach with us because what if Tucker did lay down in the trailer? You know, that could be very dangerous for Ruach. There's no other horses up there with them in the pens. And I'm like, we have to leave Ruach behind. And we didn't know if we would just be a few hours or if we would have to stay up there the whole night or what was going on. Luckily, there were also some horse volunteers who were there. And we kind of forgot they were there because they were over a hill, so you don't really see them too much. And Debbie and Russ, they were like, well, why don't you go talk to them and ask them if they could just check on Ruach, because, you know, they had horse experience and they could keep an eye on him. The trailer at this point is hooked up and we're heading out. And of course, I didn't have Banamine on hand. And for those of you who don't know, Banamine is this medication you can give horses if they're colicking, where when a horse colics, their digestive system is like contracting and it's really tight. And so it's hard for them to pass anything or get their system moving. But the Banamine relaxes their system, and it also kind of like relieves the pain. And a lot of times that could actually get things moving and the horse could stop colicking. I, of course, didn't have any of that with me, which was stupid looking back. I should have made sure I had some of that. As we're leaving, those horse volunteers had a tube of Banamine, and they gave that to me. So I gave it to Tucker, like in the trailer as we're heading out. So for 2 hours, mind you, a lot of you know this, a lot of you don't. But when a horse is colicking, there's 2 types of colic. There's gas colic, which is just where they kind of have like a gas tummy ache, and that's the best kind of colic you can have. Then there is impaction colic, where something is actually impacted or stuck in the digestive system and it is blocking the rest of the digestive system. That is the bad kind of colic. If impaction is really bad, the horse may have to have surgery, and that's usually what leads to death, is if there's really bad impaction colic. Since we couldn't get a vet out to check Tucker, we didn't know what it was, and for the 2 hours we were driving up to Ocala, we didn't know what he was dealing with. So just having that to mentally deal with, I just kept pushing it to the back of my mind, and I just kept saying, he's fine, it's just gas colic, he will be okay. We get to Ocala at 10 p.m. We pull into this really nice vet facility, because for those of you who don't know, Ocala, Florida is like the horse capital of the world. There's so many horses down in Ocala, and the whole community is geared towards horses. We get into the vet clinic, we offload Tucker. At this point, the Banamine has kicked in, and he does seem a little bit more lively. Like, he was very sedate originally and just like lethargic and not himself. But getting off the trailer, he seemed a little bit more awake, which is also probably just, you know, riding on a trailer and being in a new place. I ran the vet through what had happened. I said that I did give him Banamine about 2 hours ago, so it's probably kicking in now. They end up doing an ultrasound, and they don't find any impaction, which was good. They also do a test where, this is gross, but they stick their hand up the horse's rear end, and they try to feel if there's impaction up there. He was good. So she did feel that, like, his small intestine had shifted a little bit, and, like, the colon was still gooey, is a kind of the visual I get, to where that kind of represents it's more of a gas colic. So praise the Lord, it was only gas colic. It's the best kind of colic you can have. And I'm really sure that the Banamine probably helped a lot with that. What had happened, and like I said, there was like a bunch of horses in there for colic, is there had been a shift in the weather to where for a few days it had been really hot, and then it had cooled off a lot. And so the horses had been drinking a lot of water when it was hot, but when it cooled off, they didn't feel like they needed to drink as much water, and that led Tucker to get dehydrated and then colic. I made a video last week about, will my horses survive Florida? And of course, all of this starts happening. I'm like, oh my gosh, my initial thought was like, is it the sand in his pen? Like, is he having sand impaction colic? Is it the Bermuda hay that I'm feeding them that is really common in Florida? I wouldn't say that this was caused by Florida, so Florida still has a thumbs up. This was caused by the weather, but weird weather can happen anywhere. Like, weird weather happens in Virginia and other places too, so I'm not going to blame this one specifically on Florida. But anyway, they wanted to keep him at least overnight, and what they said is, what they do is overnight they take all feed away from him, and they'll just give him fluids, like he had an IV in his neck, and they just monitor him. And basically the night is really going to determine what happens and what's needed. They said from the get-go, like, he looks pretty good. Like, he'll probably recover and be fine, but you don't really know until you start introducing food back to the horse, and then you'll see how they will react. He was going to go all night without eating, and then in the morning, they said they would reintroduce food. At this point, they said, you can take him home in the morning, you know, and camp out in the parking lot in your trailer. You can take him home in the morning if you're comfortable and introduce food to him yourself, but that's also where problems may show up. So then I am left with the decision of, do I take him home an hour and a half away to the other campground? And then we get there and I introduce food and he does have a problem, and then I have to drive an hour and a half back. Or they said the other option would be he can stay at the hospital and the vets will introduce him back to food and they will monitor him. He will be watched by professionals, and then we could pick him up in 2 days. For peace of mind and for having access to the vet quickly, we thought it was best if we left him there to where they would introduce the food and monitor him and make sure he's okay. We talked it over with the vet. They said, that sounds fine, why don't you go back to your campground? Because they knew we had come from an hour and a half away. And they said that no news is good news, and we'll just call you in the morning and update you for how he's doing. We head back to the campground. We get in probably about 1:30 a.m. We don't even unhook the trailer, we just go to sleep. Mind you, I didn't really sleep well because I was just like on an adrenaline rush from the whole night. But by that time I kind of knew like, okay, Tucker's okay, he just had gas colic. There shouldn't really be any more problems. So the night went on, no calls. They call me in the morning, they say he's doing great. They did have to give him some more Banamine, but they're gonna start introducing him to food and we will see how he does throughout the day. So while Tucker is at the vet, you know, we have Ruach by himself at the campground. We actually had to move to our next campground on Saturday, so we thought, okay, we can just go up to Ocala, pick up Tucker, and then go to the next campground because it was kind of on the way. Praise the Lord, all checked out in the end. They kept him overnight, they introduced food, he handled it well, and then we went and we picked him up on Saturday and came to our new campground. Even though Tucker was doing good, it was still just a little overwhelming because you're thinking, okay, will it stress him out being in a new environment? And then, you know, how do I handle colic recovery in a new place? Like, is that gonna add fuel to the fire? But in reality, Tucker has been doing so well on the trip and coming to new places and immediately just feeling relaxed and okay. So we've pretty much just given him a week off. And the first few days after the colic, he really wasn't himself. I mean, he was awake and he was good and everything, but he just didn't move around a whole lot. You think if you have a stomach ache for hours on end and like your intestines are contracting and then your small intestine shifted a little bit, you know, you probably are gonna be sore. So we haven't done much with him. Yesterday we did take him out on a walk, and then last night he really started being more of himself where he was chasing Ruach around and moving a whole lot more. So he's back to his normal self, praise the Lord. I am gonna try and ride him within the next few days and just take it easy and let him get back to that as well. Now, evaluating the situation, do I think Tucker colicked because we're on this trip, he's traveling, and he's in Florida? Like I mentioned, I don't think it's related because he's been very comfortable in every environment he's been in. He's eaten normally. For the most part, he's drank normally. It was just that change in weather, which was so weird. Another shift had been, they haven't been getting grass in Florida because the grass is all kind of dead. They've just been getting their hay and their feed. You know, hay doesn't have moisture content like grass does. And so when you add that, it's like his water levels were just way down in general. And that's due to a few different things. So we just got to make sure he drinks water. I did want to turn this into an educational moment because there's a lot that I learned from the situation, and there's a lot I think that other people could benefit from learning. The first thing I want to do is I want to share how to tell if your horse is colicking from the perspective of someone who has never gone through that, which is Colin. So Colin was able to recognize there was something wrong with Tucker, and I think a lot of horse owners may get a little overwhelmed on like, how do I tell if my horse is colicking? Because I know my mom and dad have horses, and my dad has called me before and been like, I think the horses are colicking. Bella's rolling in the field. And then like I go out there and then she was completely fine. She was just rolling because she wanted to cover herself in dirt, you know? So I'm gonna ask him how he was able to tell there was something wrong, and that way you can know this when it comes to your own horse. Besides me saying this horse is colicking, how could you tell before that moment that there was something wrong?
Well, I know that these horses love food. Like, it's their favorite thing ever. So the first red flag was when we went out there. Tucker's usually like whinnying for his food, standing at the gate waiting for us. But when we went out there to feed, he was just laying down, and he's not usually laying down at that time. The next real red flag was it took some work to get him to stand up. Like, he's normally chomping at the bit to eat his dinner. We eventually got him up, and then he still didn't want his food, and he laid back down again. So at that point, I was like, okay, there's something wrong with him.
And one thing I'll point out is you can usually just tell a change in the horse's personality. I've dealt with colic a few times in a few different horses, and one horse was like frantic, like something was definitely wrong. They would lay down and roll and then stand up and trot around and lay down and roll, and they were just very like worried. And then with Tucker, it was more like he was just lethargic and he just wasn't himself. And so that's really a big indicator that something is wrong. Even not considering colic, just wrong with them in general, they're not going to be themselves. So for those of you wondering, here he is. Hey, buddy. He said, I've recovered, Mom. I'm just eating my hay. When we did get him back, he was a lot thinner just because he hadn't been eating as much because they were monitoring him and they had to introduce the food back slowly. So another thing I want to do is I also just want to talk about some things you can do to prevent colic. A lot of things could honestly cause colic, but there's one thing that will definitely lead to colic, which is dehydration. And so you want to make sure your horse is drinking water, like in any temperature, whether it's cold or hot. So I'm going to show you how we have changed their diet to accommodate this. These are the horses' feed buckets now. So they have about 2 gallons of water now that we are soaking their food in. So they have to drink a lot of water before they are able to get down to their food. And that means, if horses drink, anywhere from 6 to 10 gallons of water a day, if we're feeding them 3 times a day and they get 2 gallons of water when they eat, that is 6 gallons of water. So that's setting them up for success. And so also feeding your horse more frequently, like we feed our horses just anyway 3 times a day. So that means they are getting that water at 3 increments throughout the day. And then the vet said table salt will be your best friend. Like electrolytes can only do so much, but table salt is really gonna make it work. And so what I do is I take the table salt and I'll put it in here too. Like I put some in their food and then I'll also put this in their hay. So they're getting a lot of salt throughout the day and that will trick them into drinking. Your horse's poop will say how well hydrated they are. So if their poop is more like nuggets, that means they're kind of dehydrated. But when it's like more cohesive and not really separate clumps, that means they have good water intake. Also, get yourself some Banamine. So you can get this from your vet and it comes in like a vial and you're gonna need a syringe. And this is injectable, like you can inject it into their artery or you can squirt it under their tongue. Knowing now what I know about Banamine, if you're a new horse owner or you're getting a horse, go ask your vet for some Banamine. It's not expensive at all. For this vial, I think it was $23. But this stuff could save your horse's life. It is very important to have this. And actually what the vet had ended up telling me is what they recommend doing is if your horse is colicking, give them some Banamine. It may take an hour and a half for the Banamine to kick in, but sometimes Banamine can be enough to stop the colic because it relaxes the system and it enables things to move through the system. Sometimes this is all your horse needs, but if the colic persists, that's when you would actually want to go to the vet and get them to look at your horse. So mind you, you do what you feel comfortable with. If your horse is colicking, call a vet if that's what you want to do. But if I would have had this when I noticed Tucker colicking, I would have given it to him immediately and I would have watched him and waited to see how he responded. Because honestly, I do think his colic was so mild, I feel like the Banamine actually made him better because once we got to the vet, he was in his stall, but he was trying to eat. So he felt a whole lot better. If your horse is colicking, you need to take away all the food from them because if there is impaction, that food is just going to pile up in their system. Another thing I have learned specifically in Florida is that you will want to treat your horses for sand, whether you're in like Florida or Arizona or anywhere where there's really sandy soil, because sand will lead to impaction colic. The sand can't go through the digestive system like other materials, and so it kind of gets weighed down and bogged down in the system. And eventually that could all just pile up and block the system. So this is just one brand called Sand Aid, and it's a pelleted form. You feed it to them and it's kind of sticky, and so as it goes through the digestive system, it will stick to the sand and then like flush the sand from the system. And so you feed this to them for a week at a time, and then you do it like once a month. You would also want to avoid feeding your horses like on the ground if it's sandy ground, just because the horse will naturally consume more sand that way. So we've been feeding the horses their hay in hay nets so that their food is off the ground and they're less likely to eat the sand. When it comes to owning or caring for horses, unfortunately, you just have to learn a lot of things the hard way. And so I've made an online course to hopefully save you some trouble and give you some information that can help prepare you for horses so that you don't have to learn the hard way. That course is the Horse Care Keys for Success course, and it's at shop.equinehelper.com, so be sure to check that out. If you found this video helpful, please be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more weekly horse videos.